Good evening and welcome to Cinemateket. Welcome to the audience and a warm welcome to our guest of honor, the film director Mia Hansen-Løve. We are so grateful that you could come to Copenhagen in connection to our retrospective of all of your films and also in connection to the festival Copenhagen Pigs weekend. We really admire your films. They show a lot of sensibility and I think they deal with human conditions and relations between people and family members that we can all relate to. So thank you for all the films we enjoyed during the years.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I was very happy that I could make it to Copenhagen and be here for this retrospective. Thanks again.
Thank you. And actually Mia has been here a few days and her daughter is also here. And on Thursday she presented her film, her newest film, Bergman Island. And yesterday she was at the National Film School of Denmark and talked to the pupils there. Tonight I will do a talk with Mia, but we will also open up for questions from the hall. So please think about something you would like to ask Mia about now that she is here. My name is Lone Sardemann and I'm one of the programmers at Cinemateket, and I had the honor to make this retrospective, and I have followed the work of Mia during many years when I was at film festivals and also the ones that received premiere in Denmark. A few of them heavily did, like Eden and L'Avenir. I also want to thank, before we start, our partners. It's of course Copenhagen Pigs weekend and Institut Français and the French Embassy, who were a great help and support. I hope you're settled, Mia, in this big chair. And I want to tell you that we are all a little proud that you have a Danish surname. And everyone I meet, they ask me about this name.
I'm the most proud about it.
So I think we have to get it straight.
Yes.
That what is your connection to Denmark?
It's thanks to my grandfather, who was Danish. He was actually half Danish, half Austrian, and he grew up in Austria, but he had an Austrian mother and a Danish father who was part of the Danish army, and I have a very beautiful picture of this grandfather of mine, who I never met, of course. And he flew away from Austria in 1939 because he was at a very young age resistant.
Yes.
And he went to Denmark again. I mean, he had part of his family there, but he went to Denmark, and then the Nazis came to Denmark too at some point. And he had, that's a little bit of a myth that has been defining for my vision of my family, especially the Danish roots. So that's why I'm telling it. He had, I mean, his best friend was murdered in an apartment where he was, and he was hidden under a bed or under a couch or something, and his best friend's name was Ole, and because of that he named my father, his first son, he had 6 sons, Ole. So it's very emotional and very strong for me. I mean, even though I don't have any Danish family anymore, we all carry Danish names in my family, and I still continue the tradition. I have a son who I named Søren. So you see, I'm very attached to and proud of my Danish roots, actually.
You also told me you had a Lars and a Nils in your family.
I have everything
so
possible.
All the classical names.
And actually, I struggled to find a name that wasn't already that was still available for my son, because in my family they all have their names are Sven and Lars and Niels and Eivind and Oge and.
You must have many troubles in France.
We do, actually, because some of them are easy to pronounce, like Lars and Niels, but for instance, my father's name was really impossible, especially for my mother, who couldn't speak a word of Danish or German.
And do you speak Danish yourself?
Jeg kan ikke tale dansk. Nej, men jeg kan forstå lidt. Jeg studerer dansk på universitet. Just only 2 years, so that's what's left, unfortunately. But I have a feeling for the language and for the accent, and I can definitely understand a bit.
Do you feel especially related to Nordic culture now that you have these roots?
I do, although I feel a little bit shy to speak about it in front of you are real Danish people, not like me. But I do feel very connected, or at least attracted, and it's of course not by accident that I mean, in that film I shot a few scenes in Denmark, and in my last film, I mean Bergman Island, I shot in Sweden, which is not Denmark, but still it's part of the intimate desire to make that film, I think, had to do with my desire to approach the Nordic culture and light, I think, yes.
Let's go a little into some of your first films, and I would like to excuse that somehow some computer magic happened, and Mia's first film, All Is Forgiven, to a Pardonné, has landed down below, but it is her first film. In your two first film, All Is Forgiven and The Father of My Children, you deal a lot with the theme father and daughter relation.
Yes.
And I wondered, why is this subject so important for you?
I also wonder. Maybe because of what I just told you about my grandfather and these father figures who have been very important in my family story, but who also were gone very, especially my grandfather. He died very early. He committed suicide, my Danish grandfather. So I never met him, and there was this tragedy in my family that has haunted, I think, my family, and I think and in a way that all the kids of my grandfather inherited somehow this melancholy that maybe I also inherited from. And I think in the middle of that there is this question of the self-destructive man that has haunted me, at least when I made my first films. All Is Forgiven was a film. A lot of people think that it was an autobiographical film, that it was inspired my father and my life. Actually, it wasn't exactly the case. It was inspired by my uncle's life. As a teenager, I could say witnessed the story of my uncle who met his daughter again after not seeing her for many years, and he died a month after meeting her again. And that story, and I was 13 years old when that happened. My cousin, she was 16, but that story really has deeply shaken me at that age. And I think when I wrote my first feature, somehow that story appeared to me as I felt connected to that story as if it was something defining for me, for my story, for the kind of sensitivity that I felt the closest to. I had the feeling that story was the most right way for me to express who I was at this point. And then and then Father of My Children was inspired by a film producer who I met when he was supposed to produce my first feature, All Is Forgiven, and he committed suicide a little bit in the same way like my grandfather did. He had 2 daughters. The producer I'm talking about, his name was Humbert Balzan. He was a great French producer, and I was very lucky to meet him, and I think it's a lot thanks to him that I could make my first feature, although he was gone, because he has been starting to produce it during a year, and it helped me really, to start with the film. And so I think why I made this film was a way to pay tribute to him, but I think it was also because it connected me with my own family story and the big questions that had been my questions as a teenager, as a young people, as a young girl, trying to figure out how it was possible that a man who had 6 kids and a loving wife would commit suicide because he was so melancholic, you know. So that's I really grew up with that question that's impossible to answer, and so when that happened in my own life, that somebody not that close, of course, but still somebody important for me did the same thing, that inspired me to make this film. And I think, yes, that was an indirect way to deal with themes that were very close to me.
And actually, I think many of your films deal with quite strong issues, like suicide or grief, but you always do it in a very undramatical way, I would say. How come you don't? Many films build up towards the dramatic point, the turning point, but you don't. It's more like a natural thing happening in their life. Somebody is dying.
Well, it's a matter. Well, I guess it's a matter of sensitivity and of approach of the cinema. I guess I think I want to deal with some themes that have often to do with the cruelty of life or some tragic aspects of life that we all know. But at the same time, I don't want to manipulate people in a way that, and I don't want to use the real tragedy of life in order to make people cry or just to make efficient scripts. It's not that I'm not interested in creating emotions. Of course, I'm interested in emotions, and that's all my films start with some emotions actually. But I would like to capture life in a way in my film that I transmit. I would like to transmit a feeling of truth and a feeling of life, and I would like the emotion to result from that feeling of truth, and not from just like the usual tricks that people use to just, you know, provoke emotions in cinema. And I think you can do that very easily with tricks, you know, in the scripts. And but for me, a lot of these tricks, things that people do in the scripts in order to just dramatize life, they don't have to do with the truth of life as I experience it. They have to do with the film industry somehow. I'm sorry, I don't always have the right words, so I'm trying to find out another way to say it. But yes, I'm looking for certain emotions, and I'm trying to transmit sometimes a melancholy or a sadness, but I'm also trying to keep it in a distance, in a way that people can have their own space and are not forced into the emotion. And that has been very defining, I think, for my cinema since I ever started. And the other thing that I would like to say about this is that also I think this choice of not dramatizing my story when I could also has to do with my need of going towards a light, basically. I think the kind of cinema we do, I mean, directors are defined by what we want them to give us also. And I couldn't make films that would be too dark or on the one hand, I don't want to make film with happy hands in a way that would manipulate people and make life look better than it is. And on the other hand, I also don't want to depress people, or especially to depress myself with my films. So it's for me, it's really a matter of finding the right balance between telling the truth. There is not one truth, but what I think is the truth of my experience, trying to capture what it is for me, being lucid, I mean, And on the other end, finding some kind of way out and giving a direction towards some kind of light, even though I don't believe in God and in life after death and this thing, there is still a mystery of life that I believe in, and there are still questions that are open for me and that help me find a way out, even in very dark moments of my stories or of my film.
Yeah, I guess that's what art can help us do. And I think you're quite brave because you take a lot of autobiographical stuff in your films. That's what I heard you tell and what I read. Isn't it difficult sometimes to bring all this personal stuff in a fictional frame?
Yes, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell myself it's because I'm brave. I think it's some kind of lack of imagination that I try to turn into some strength. Or I realized quite early when I started writing that there was no other way for me. It was like this or nothing, and I still hope for the moment where I can really, make a story that would have nothing to do with my personal life, and because of course I totally believe that we don't have to get inspiration from our own life directly, that you can make very intimate and personal stories with that things that you have totally invented. There is not one single way to reach the truth of life but it's just that for me it's that way, and I just don't know any other way. It always felt I always tried, and I still do, like, to create stories that are further away from me, but it always feels very artificial, less sincere, and maybe it's because I give too much importance to sincerity or transparency, or I don't know where I got that from, or I don't really know if it's handicap, something that a lack of imagination, or if it's something that has to do with the need of being totally sincere. But I just don't know any other way. But at the end, I know it sounds strange maybe, but to me my films are total fictions at the end. Even though they were always inspired one way or another, they were always inspired by my life, or the life of people around me who were close, who were gone, or stories around me somehow. Once I start writing a script, and especially once an actor starts playing the part, it becomes a fiction, it becomes cinema, and ultimately it always moves to another direction, even though it can be very faithful in a way to what you're trying to say and your emotions, your initial desires, and to the source. It's still thanks to the work of art. It's thanks to the fact that you always have to reinvent yourself, to recreate the scenes. I don't even know what it means actually, autobiographical, when we're talking about films, because at the end it's always a recreation. It's always, even if I wanted to make something that would really be autobiographical, I would still need to change so many things, and it would be other actors, and it would be, I don't know, another country. And at the end there are so many things that change, and it's another rhythm, and you recreate a story out of nothing. So it's very subjective actually when we say that a film is autobiographic. We say that because of some facts that are the same. But if we talk about the scenes themselves, or what has really happened, the way I'm not even sure any of the scenes really happened the way I tell them in my films. For instance, Bergman Island, I never went to Foreux with the father of my child, for instance. I was there alone, and I wrote the film alone. So you see, it's just an example, but that means it's very subjective, the definition of autobiography, when we're talking about cinema, I think.
But for sure, I think you succeed by transferring the personal into the universal that we can all relate to.
I hope that's what I'm trying to do, at least.
The film the audience is going to see tonight, which I like very much, Goodbye First Love, I understand is about your own adolescence. By making this film, did you actually understand yourself better as a young person?
That's a good question. It's long ago. I think making the film helped me to move on. I think I wanted to try to understand or capture the way. I think I was a very melancholic teenager, and at some point I managed to use all that energy, because you can put a lot of energy into being a melancholic person. And I think at some point I managed to turn that negative energy into some positive energy, which has been for me making films. And that's why I've sometimes said that cinema saved my life. Of course, it's exaggerate, but what I mean is that it's really that I'm so grateful to cinema that it brought me back to earth. Basically, I really feel like the moment that I was on a set and felt that I could be a director, which happened the first day when I ever was on a set as a director doing my first short film. Like suddenly I felt strong, and I felt I could live my life intensely, being 100% present to what I was doing. And before that, I felt always like as being in a distance to what I was living. You know, I felt that's what I call melancholy, like not being able to really be 100% where you are and always be distant, you know, to what you live. And I think really the experience of the set, the intensity, the richness, the power of fiction, the magic of cinema, literally, I mean, liberated me from this distance that I had to reality, and literally brought me back to reality. And that's a feeling I think there was no experience in my life that was as strong as that. I mean, that discovering that power, or the fact that it was actually possible not to erase your melancholy or to make it just vanish or change who you are, but use the negative forces and transform them into something creative, basically. And that's what cinema did to me. And I think actually why I made that film was to try to get back to this moment where something happened, and I was able to transform, and without being another. While I was still faithful to who I was, and still had the same feelings maybe, but I was still able to do something with it. But in order to show that, I needed to show the first love and all these feelings and where this melancholy comes from. I think it actually comes from deeper even than what it says in the film. But it's still part of, I mean, this first love was very defining for the character, as it was for me as a teenager, or at least I thought it was really everything in the world. So I needed to show how important it was and how beautiful it was, in order to show the sadness when it's, or the désespoir, the despair when it's gone, and how you survive it, and how you can manage to be a strong person without even turning the page, because, well, I don't want to spoil the film, but you will see it's very nuanced in the film. It's not black and white. It was not black and white for me, but still. So I could say, yes, the film is autobiographical because it really deals with themes and questions that were really defining for me as a young woman. But at the same time, in the film, she will become an architect, and I never was an architect, of course. And that's why I say, for me, at the end, it's always a fiction, because there is always a transformation, a reinvention, and that's why what I enjoy about making films also. It's the fact that you can use your own life as a first material, but at the end, cinema is a way to explore other worlds, other vocations, and I really enjoyed what I enjoyed about making film. Was this film, for instance, was also the fact that it was an opportunity for me to really get into architecture and work, get really deep into this field that I didn't know that much about before.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your way to become a film director, because I know you were an actor in some films by Olivier Assayas, and you also wrote for the well-known magazine Cahiers du Cinéma. And in the end, you ended with the film directing, and you didn't even go to film school. Please tell how that road was.
Actually, my experience as an actress and my experience as a film critic were both very, very short. And I always feel a little bit like an imposteur. How do you say? I'm sure somebody speaks French. Imposter? Well. When I get reminded about this, because I only played in 2 films of Olivier Assayas, and one I was 17 years old, and it was very it changed my life, because I had nothing to do with the film business, neither my parents, and so I was in that film a lot by chance, by accident. They were doing a casting in the schools, and that's how I ended up in this film, and it changed my life, and it was the first time that I discovered what a film set was, and when I was talking earlier about the power of fiction, that's the first time that I became aware of that, was when I was on that set as an actress. But I never felt really as an actress, to be honest. I was always very shy, and after that I played again in one of his films, but a really very short part, and I went to a theater school, and the first year went really good, like I really enjoyed it, but then suddenly in the second year I became so shy, I couldn't go on. It's weird, like it was usually you would think you're shy in the beginning and then you become more self-confident, but for me it was really like the reverse, like the opposite. I was self-confident when I was 16 and 17, but then I couldn't stand like the teachers telling me, commenting on my physical attitude and telling me how, I felt really bad, and I realized I really preferred sitting in the dark and look at the others. So that's when I started to figure out that I wasn't going to be an actress. And film critic, yes, well, my experience as a film critic was maybe 2 years, maybe 3. It was very short. It was really hard for me to write on films, much harder than to write them, actually. No, but really, and I think if I had to write one film review today, it would still be a nightmare. And I think it was a nightmare for my chiefs also to read my text and rewrite them. No, but it certainly helped me a lot to do that, because it helped me to learn to be more critical on my own writings, and to try to put the right words on what I was thinking on the films, to try to. A lot of people don't know how to speak about films. Including directors. It's difficult to find the words to express, to really articulate your thoughts on a film. I still find that difficult to say what you like or don't like. And I think I actually learned a lot from trying to to articulate what I thought on films, and it helped me for my own work later, obviously. But I did that also because of the directors who I admired so much, and they had been there, and I thought it would be a good film school. And yes, I didn't go to any film school. I didn't feel at all capable for that. I had no self-confidence, and I wasn't a great cinephile at that age. I mean, it was all new for me, and the kind of people, or at least that's what I thought, who would go to the film schools in France, to La Fémis, the great, the big prestigious film school. The kind of people who I knew around me who were trying to apply for this school, they seemed so much more, they seemed to have so much more knowledge than me on cinema history. I was really new, and also I didn't want to go back to school. For me, cinema was really about escaping from school. It was about freedom. It was about adventure, and it can sound very naive, but maybe because I was in this very famous, good, very serious French school during 7 years. That's my parents wanted me to go. For me, cinema was like escaping from that very, strict and academic world, and so I didn't want that cinema to bring me to this academic world. I wanted to be the opposite.
So you learned by doing. Impressive.
Yes, well, by doing, but also I was living with a director, so I think it helped me a lot. I cannot deny that. I learned a lot from speaking with him, from hearing him speaking about cinema. I actually never went to his film sets, but we just talked and talked and talked about cinema, and I think it helped me a lot to gain self-confidence, and to also technically I learned a lot from that relationship, of course.
Let's go back to your film works. When you make the film Eden, it seems like a change in your filmography, or it's a change of theme. Suddenly you deal with the music scene in Paris with the house music and garage, I think it's called. How come you picked up that subject?
There were a couple of reasons. One of them was that so my older brother Sven, yes, he had been a quite famous DJ in around the years 2000, and he was part of this French movement called the French Touch, involved in house music, and he was and so thanks to him and to his success in these years, I experienced that with him as a young teenager. It was quite nice to be 13 years old or 14 years old and have a 7 years older brother who was really like in the middle of this very exciting scene in Paris in these years. So I was very impressed by that. But what I mean is that in these years, when I wrote Eden, he was trying to change life, and it was very hard. He really had a hard time after 20 years of living as a DJ and all the troubles involved that it meant for him. He really had a hard time to turn the page, basically, and he was trying to do that. And at some point I thought it could be beautiful to write a film together. That for me it would be an extremely interesting project to try to make a film that would be a portrait of a DJ inspired by him, but through that also a portrait of a whole generation. That was, I thought, very relevant and exciting. And I thought, well, for him also it could make sense at the moment where he was trying to change life and become a writer, which he became after. To write this with me was maybe a good way of some kind of therapy, to start a new life. So that's how we both decided to write this film together. But I remember that one of the things that gave me the idea at some point is when I showed Goodbye First Love to a close friend of mine who thought that the film was Goodbye First Love was very melancholic, and he said, but you don't remember in those years you were not always like this, you know, you always had the great parties, you had fun, and it was as if he was telling me, or I realized that there was like a lightness in this youth also, and some very strong collective moments that were also part of my youth, and that they were very happy moments, and that it was like a part of my own life also that I had like completely forgotten almost. And it kind of opened my eyes and made me also want to do this film, which is what is ironic is that at the end Eden was perceived as my most melancholic film when I was trying to make like, you know, this one very like I wouldn't say happy film, but you know, film about all this excitement about music, and at the end it was perceived in a very different way.
And you succeeded getting the music from Daft Punk at the film. And actually, I think you're very good at using music in your films to stress the atmosphere of them. In Maya, you have some music by Nick Cave. And actually, for Danes, it's quite funny because the melody Distant Sky is with also a Danish opera singer, Else Torp, who has a kind of solo in this. And in Bergman Island, you use this classical song, Hvem kan segler, which we all know.
Yes.
And yeah, in All Forgiven, I think you use some kind of Irish music, which I was quite surprised about. But how do you pick this music for your films?
I've used a lot of lullabies, actually. I think that's a little bit what all these different songs, not all of them, but I realized that I use very different songs that have in common to all be lullabies. Like the Irish or Scottish songs that I used in my two first features, there are some kind of lullabies, and Hvem kan segler is also, I think I'm very sensitive to this kind of songs that have something to do with childhood, and I think childhood is very much in the heart of my film in a way, and in my use of music. Actually, I think what is maybe special about my use of music in my film have to do with the songs themselves, but also with the fact that I never worked with any film music composer. So I never had any song written for my film. I always enjoyed the idea of using songs that pre-exist and that bring their own atmosphere, their own soul, so to say. For some reasons, I always enjoyed that idea of like connecting a song that exists and has its own thing, you know, past and story and life, so to say, and connecting it to the world of my film, instead of having somebody who would see the film or scenes of the film and make a music perfect for the scenes that would just fit the scenes, you know, which I love as a spectator. I mean, I don't have problems with that when I watch films, but for my own films, I always preferred to bring the world of another singer, something that has its own past. I think it's the same thing like, for instance, when I go to a location, I could not film in a studio. I always need to go to locations that have their stories and their own past, and where I feel the lives before. And it's a little bit like that for the music as well. I think I love using pre-existent music because to me they bring all of a story.
In your film L'Avenir, in Danish, Dagen i morgen, you describe a woman that is a professor in philosophy, and I wondered how much of this role is actually your own mom.
Well, a lot. Yes, a lot. But I mean, again, well, it's also Isabelle Huppert. I think Isabelle Huppert also gave a lot to the part. She gave her irony. She gave her own energy, her own sense of humor, and that also gave a lot to the film. And at the end, it's very defining for the film, I think. But still, I think the film is a real meeting of my mother and Isabelle Huppert's personality. I think the character is really like the result of that meeting somehow.
Isabelle Huppert is really wonderful in this role. I think I almost didn't see her better than in this role.
You've seen her in many films where she's she's such an incredible actress. Yeah. And it was the first time that I was working with I was used to work with unknown actors or non-professional actors or teenagers, children. I had made 4 films before. All of them were done that way. And so my 5th film, Things to Come, with Isabelle Huppert, it was really the first time that I would work with a famous actress who had such a impressive filmography. And that was very intimidating, actually, for me, very new. I wasn't sure if I would enjoy that because I like to work with confidence and in a very relaxed way. I don't like to work in stress. But actually, she has this thing that I wouldn't say that she's not intimidating. That would be a lie. But she managed to really get into the film and the part in a way that at the end, I could almost forget where she was coming from.
And actually, I know from other interviews that it's very important for you, the process of choosing actors. You also work, as you mentioned, with non-professionals. How do you go about this? How do you find the right persons for your characters?
It's difficult to say because it has changed. I think a little bit my relationship to actors. I'm maybe less scared, or I think during a long time I would not work. I would not even feel the desire to work with actors who had too much experience. I enjoyed working with people who didn't have so much experience, like me, I guess. I think when I started making films, I worked with people who also started making films. And I include also producers, the DP. He made his first films. The DP of my first films, it was his first films too. I mean, all the people around me were all doing their first films. I didn't like the idea of working with people who were going to have like too much experience compared to me. And I also like the idea of discovering new faces and film people who had that kind of innocence that I'm very sensitive to, and I still am, and I still want to make films with unknown people and find people, in the street and or work with children, and I really enjoy that. And even when I did Bergman Island, I mean, you have actors who have a strong background or who are famous or whatever, but you also have in the film playing important parts people who have never played before, like Hampus Nordensen, for instance. Is the 5th role in the film, but he was there a lot and he had never been in a film before. So it's still very dear to me, that way of working. But I'm also a curious person, and I realized after having made a couple of films that I also felt interest for trying to work with some actors who I had seen in some films and who I loved. Like, for instance, Isabelle Huppert. I was a huge admirer of her. And so when I wrote Things to Come, I was thinking of her for the part, and I wasn't thinking of anybody else. I couldn't imagine anybody else in the part, really. I think if she had not agreed on making the film, I would not have made it. I really wrote the film with her in mind from the start. So it really depends on the films. I think now I could write a film with an actor in mind, maybe a famous one, or I could also want to make a film with unknown or children, and there is nothing. At the end at the end you're always looking for some kind of innocence, or at least I am, whether I will work with a non-professional or with a more famous actor.
Is it true you searched a long time for the character in Goodbye First Love that she is in love with? The
Sebastian?
Yeah.
Yes, it's true. That's how I ended up working with a German actor. The reason was not because he was going to be German. It was just because I couldn't find him in France, which is a little bit absurd, because I'm sure I could have found, but maybe I would have needed more time. But I must have been looking for something very specific that I couldn't find, and I saw a lot of young actors. I thought they were looking like young actors, and I didn't like that. Until I found him in Germany, yes. And when I did Bergman Island, also for the lover, maybe it's because it's the lover's part, you know, where I'm really very difficult. He was supposed to be American, and I ended up to work with Anders Danielsen Lie, who is from Norway, because I could not find any young American actor who I liked for the part in the US. So I thought of Anders, who I loved as an actor, and I said, okay, let's say this part is a Norwegian guy. It's okay.
Anders is the one who worked with Joachim Trier many times, and I also want to tell you all that Mia's new film, Bergman Island, will get its premiere in Denmark in April 22. I start to forget asking the hall if you have any questions, and my colleague will pass a microphone around, because we are many in the room, so that you can all hear. So please raise your hand if you have a question for Mia. Yeah. The first one in the white shirt.
I wanted to ask about your screenwriting process, or like you actually said that you never went to, for example, Foro with Olivier Assayas, but do you often ask for people's opinion while you're working on the script, or like even before you start writing? Like what's the stage where you start getting people's feedback, and whether you have some like people that you always turn to for feedback, or just this?
Yeah, well, I usually ask the opinion of like 1, 2, maximum 3 people. I know that there are some script writers who enjoy, like, who need the opinions of a lot of people. And I hate it. Like I think if I would hear more than 1, 2, or 3 people's opinion, and these people have to be people who really love my work. I think if I would hear anybody else's opinion when I write my films, none of my films would ever have been done. Like, honestly, it's really the worst time for me when I make my films is when I finish the script and I have given my script to this person or these 2 people who are really close to me and who like what I'm doing, and when I actually have to give it to, you know, the commission, the CNC, like this, like where you get the money from, basically, and then you go to this place where you have to talk about your script in front of 15 people, and they all have their opinions on your scripts, and you get notes. Like, that's the moment where I feel the most vulnerable. It's really awful, and usually I don't succeed in this exercise, actually. My scripts were never, or very unusually, maybe 1 or 2 of them, but they were never really successful. So I always feel very like harmless, vulnerable and naked, like when it's just a script. Maybe I'm stronger as a director, as I don't know, but my scripts are very simple. There is too many descriptions, and also they don't follow the rules, I think, that people expect from a good script, like where you really know what the character wants. So something like a critic that I would hear a lot would be, for instance, but we don't really know what she wants. And in my life, I don't really know what I want, you know. So I guess it has to do with, I don't know, but, you know, people like to really know what is this about, like, and I think my scripts are not very efficient. And so I hate having too many people reading them. Even friends sometimes ask me, and I don't want to give it to them. And it's the same with my films, actually. It's quite strange, though, because when I finish editing my films, I only show it to one or two people, the same ones who have read the script, and then I show it to the producers. But then I know that at the end everybody who wants to see it will see it. So it's not like I can hide them forever. I know I will have to confront the public's opinion at some point. But then when that happens, I'm okay with it. I just, I try to not look at it and just move on. But so I can accept it at some point, and I have to. But when I'm still in the moment where the film is not completely finished, and it's not over, and that's the moment where you still feel very vulnerable, I could never do some kind of screen test like some people do. I know a lot of directors, also like directors who write very personal films, like art house films, who like doing screenings where they would invite a lot of friends and after the screening ask everybody's opinion. I could never do that. I'm very protective of my films until they are over.
More questions?
Talk about the music support in the movie. You must love the movie Elvira Madigan.
I do. I love both Widerberg's movies, actually. I've seen almost all of them. Yes, I've discovered his movies a couple of years ago, watching Elvira Madigan. Maybe it was the first one, but then I discovered Odalen 31, Joe Hill, and a couple of others of his film, and I really love his work.
I heard you say you approach a movie as an escape from academia. But I was just wondering, growing up with two parents who teach philosophy, do you think there's a lot of philosophic themes in your movie? Has it still influenced your approach to your movies?
I think it has. Although I don't want to sound pretentious when I say that, because I don't have any real knowledge. I mean, I never studied philosophy, except I studied German literature. So when I was in my 4th year of German literature, at some point we had some German philosophy classes, but it was quite superficial. It was more about the history of philosophy. So I mean, I don't want to sound like I don't pretend I know anything about philosophy, even though my parents were both philosophy teachers, because I don't have anything of the kind of knowledge. I mean, I don't have the kind of knowledge they have, obviously. But I still think that the values I grew up with really influenced me deeply and still influences my work deeply. Think by yourself. I don't know how you translate this into English. Penser par soi-même. Think by yourself. Not let the other define how you think. Try to think freely is the one very central value I grew up with, for instance. Or freedom, equality between men and women, the quest for truth. I mean, these are very simple ideas, but morality, actually, even the morality. I mean, Kant's moral, I don't know much about it, but still I know how much it mattered for my father. And the debates between my mother and my father, who didn't agree about which were their favorite philosophers. My mother's favorite philosopher was Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and my father's favorite philosopher was Immanuel Kant. Or Nietzsche also was very important for my father, or Kierkegaard. So, I mean, and they would have these long arguments at home, but which I kind of enjoyed, I think, even though I didn't understand all of it. But at the end, I think they transmitted me some values, including the importance of the given in life to thinking and art and respect and versus money and being rich, and I think I was very lucky that I grew up in that atmosphere, and I'm sure it has had a lot of influence on the fact that I could become a director.
I wanted to ask, how come you think you're attracted to stories that take place over quite a long period of time? I haven't seen Bergman's Island yet, but the others usually take place over quite a long time, and usually with like time jumps.
That I really don't know. I've been asked that a lot of time, and I'm aware that has been a lot of the stories I've been telling have needed a lot of time to be told. My first feature was happening within a stretch of 15 years. It was really about passing of time. My second was in a shorter time, but it was still about passing of time. And this one is really about passing of time. I don't know, I was obsessed as a young woman. When I started making films, I was really obsessed about the shortness of life. Is it because of the tragedies in my family? But I guess everyone has tragedies in his or her family. So I don't know if it's a real reason, but that's how I feel about it. But I was really obsessed with it, really, and to a point that it brought me really like anxieties that I never really did a psychoanalysis, but I could have because of that, like it was really a problem for me. And I guess I try to explore that in my films. But now maybe it's less the case now after 15 years of making films. But I'm still waiting for the day where I will be able to to tell a story that happens like within 1 day or 3 days. It's really like my dream, to finally be able to tell a story within a very short stretch of time.
I saw the film All is Forgiven, and I thought it was stunning, really. And
thank you.
The music in there also extremely touching. And the end, I just came here I needed to ask you this question. At the end there is a song where he sings, I'm king this and that, and I have 4 queens, Mary 1, 2, 3, 4. When the day is over, there will only be 3 Marys left. This young girl, she leaves the table for the lunch and goes into the forest. And I think, how to interpret it? Is that because she will go and hang herself?
No.
Or
No.
oh, I'm so relieved. Thank you.
No, I would never. No, I'm not that dark.
Okay.
No.
I'm glad I came. So that's right.
No, it's certainly very melancholic, the ending, and she just has lost her father in the film, and there is a lot of pain involved here, and I think that song to me connected with her father somehow, because it was the same kind of songs that we were listening to in the beginning of the film. It was the same world somehow, and I'm not even sure I really understood what the song was. I mean, it's Mary Hamilton, I remember the song, but I'm not sure I ever really tried to know exactly what the song was about. But there was something about the song that I thought was extremely moving. But when she goes between the in the forest between the 2 stone flower pots, I really love that place because of the darkness. I mean, I know it's dark there, the forest, but I think you haven't seen that film, this one, Goodbye First Love. It's a little bit the same ending, actually. It's about she needs to live her life, basically. It's about destiny, the fact that you have to carry on whatever you've been through and what the painful things that you carry with you, and they are part of you. What she needs to find her own voice and find her own way, and it doesn't mean that she will forget about the past, but it's part of her. But she's gonna live her life. It's difficult for me to say that properly in English, but I hope you understand what I mean. But she's definitely not going to hang herself. I promise.
Hi, I also
Hi.
attended the screening of Bergman Island yesterday at the Danish Film School, and I was too shy there to ask you a question that I now will ask you.
Thank you.
So it's 24 hours delayed. No, my question is, since you have written for Cahiers du Cinéma for a short time, I think an important question these days for filmmakers and critics is the relation between film criticism and filmmaking. So I was wondering, and especially I mean in France there is, in my eyes, a stronger connection than in Denmark between film criticism and filmmaking. So I was wondering more on a personal level for you, if film criticism still plays a role, if you read film criticism while you make film or between films, or is it important to you, and in what sense?
I wouldn't say it's not important. It definitely is one, if at least for one reason, but of course it's not the only reason. But I think one good reason why it is so important is that it's also thanks to the good reception of my films in terms of film critics that I can make them. So I think I should be grateful to that and not be too, like, you know, not say I don't care about it, and you know, because at the end the films that I do, they don't make so much in terms of audience and public. It's very modest, you know, but why I can make them is because the distributors who have the courage to distribute them around the world, they get often a good press for these films. So I mean, in that perspective, I do think it is very important, and I feel quite grateful to the press in general, which has been really defending my film a lot, especially internationally speaking. I mean, but I don't read them. I don't read them if they are bad, because I don't need to explain you why. I don't want to know why my films are bad, you know, if they are bad. And I don't read them if they are good, because it's a little bit embarrassing too. I mean, I would read the first lines or the end, or I'm very happy, not that I don't care about it, I'm very happy to know that if it's good, but it's a little bit like seeing sometimes it feels like looking at a picture at yourself naked or something, especially with the films that you do that are so personal. And sometimes, for instance, recently my film Bergman Island was released in the US, and there was so much press, and actually the press seems to have been so good, but when I started reading it, they were going so deeply into my film that it was embarrassing, and I stopped reading it. Like it made me feel like they were reading into my life or something, you know. They were, because sometimes the press in the US, I don't know, they have much more space than they have in France. So they would write, you know, a lot of it is online, so they don't have any limit basically. And sometimes when they love a film, they would write like 10 pages and really go into your film, like, you know, shot by shot, and it's almost shocking. So I find it a little bit insane to read this, actually. So I'm just glad that they send it to me, and to know if it's good, and it's very encouraging, of course. But I never really go into the reviews themselves.
How come the translation for Un amour de jeunesse is Goodbye First Love?
I chose that title in English because of a song that I love that is called Maya. It's funny, actually, because that was long before I thought of the film Maya. It's a group called Incredible String Band that made this amazing very hippie song called Maya. Actually, one of the person of the group, his name is Robin Williamson, and I used a lot of his songs again in Bergman Island, so I've been listening to that a lot. And there was this one song called Maya that I love, and I think in that song there is this Goodbye First Love line that I used. I thought it worked better than the proper translation of Un amour de jeunesse in English.
And just follow-up question then, how important are the titles for you? when you decide on the titles for the movie?
I think they are quite important. It helps me a lot to have. I never wrote a movie that I would not have a title for instance. I think Godard said, I don't know how to say that in English, but that titles were like des panneaux indicateurs, like signs indicating you the direction, and I feel a little bit like that. Like for instance, when I wrote L'Avenir, you know, knowing that my film was the name of my film was L'Avenir, which means the future, or, you know, things to come, I mean, in French. That really was giving me the right direction, or Eden, or it's not titles that I found at the end. I had them in the very beginning.
And the last question.
Yeah, my question was about Bergman Island. So it was interesting, for instance, when she walks out of his Q&A, and then I found it quite interesting how he gives her sort of feedback. So what were your thoughts on like the relationship between having two directors? Because I don't think that's really been explored that much, and why did you want to elaborate on that and work on that?
You mean which scene in Bergman Island when she comes out of the screening and?
Yeah, when she leaves early, and also when she's of course telling the story, and then he's the way he gives feedback and what she's sort of wanting with that, and yeah.
You mean why does she ask him about his opinion and why?
I think I don't want to. Of course, if people haven't seen, but no, just more. I feel like he was a bit more abrupt, and I was just curious why you also wanted to explore with the two different directors, and if like about that relationship, if there were any more nuances, and yeah.
I think I've spent so much time in my life living with a director, because I've been living with a director during 15 years. So I've been nourished so much by this experience of being two directors and exchanging about cinema and exploring like the limit of the complicity you can have with another director when you are a director yourself, and you're writing and he's writing, and you try to have this complicity and to share as much as you can, but there is a limit to it, because there is a moment where you cannot go into the other one's world and he cannot go into your world, but at the same time you can tell the other person things that you can not tell him in your life through your films. So I thought it was extremely rich and complex, and also telling about relationships in a more universal way. The fact that there is this tension between love and comprehension, but also distance and loneliness in a couple. So I wanted to make a film about that because I had so much experience on that, but I also was hoping that through this portrait of two directors, it was going to be a film about a couple and creation.
I think we have to stop here. We have so much to talk about, but at some point we are also going to show your film. So thank you so much. It was really interesting listening to you, Mia.
Thank you for your questions and your comments. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And I have...
Thank you very much.
But
I noticed before, but I couldn't believe you actually were wearing this.
It proves I'm a real fan, and I bought it at the BFI South Bank 2 weeks ago. Thank you.
Thank you.